Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Wahoo Weekly with Jory Kratz. I'm Erik Bremer. Jory, what a beautiful day at the ballpark. Can't wait to have baseball back here at Blue Wahoo Stadium.
Right, and it all starts this weekend.
Yeah, Saturday, our first high school game between Baker and Pensacola. But for today on Wahoo Weekly, we've got a whole lot of great content for you. First up, I sit down with Hosken Powell, a Pensacola native and former major leaguer, as we continue our celebration of Black History Month. I also sit down for a Zoom conversation with Scott Brown, a local author and a historian on baseball history in Pensacola. We talk about the Pensacola Seagulls Negro League team the Blue Wahoos will be honoring this upcoming season.
Yeah, and we'll wrap things up by going over the daily promotions that were released earlier this week.
Feels like baseball. Let's get to it. I'm joined today by one of the best baseball players that Pensacola has ever produced, Hosken Powell. Hosken, thanks for joining us today. And I know that you still follow baseball quite a bit. It has to be fun to watch the Blue Wahoos year in and year out in your hometown.
Yes, it is. And like I said, the Wahoos have one of the best stadiums in baseball. And I tell you, it's nice. And I know the fans enjoy it. I enjoy it.
I want to start at the beginning because you are a Pensacola product, born in Selma, Alabama, but you grew up here in Pensacola, went to high school here. I want to know, how did you first fall in love with the game of baseball?
Well, the reason I fell in love, because back in Alabama, my grandfather, as a sharecropper, and the guys had a baseball team up in Selma, and my grandpa, because he had 5 boys, was the manager of the team, and and he put together a team, and as we were little kids, we should go out and see them play and get together, and that brought our interest into baseball, because my dad, he was on the team.
When you were growing up here in Pensacola, what were the youth programs like to get people at that age involved in baseball?
I tell you, well, the entry of baseball here in Pensacola has been great all the time, because the competitiveness here in Pensacola was, was good. Even the parents and the kids in each area, perform and put forth that effort they like to shine, because like I said, back in those days, the newspaper was Pensacola, and like I said, you enjoy looking in there and seeing your area and the progress and stuff that they had.
My broadcast partner on the Blue Wahoos Baseball Network, Kevin Sauché, grew up around the same time, and he said that you were the best hitter that he ever saw growing up here. So at what point did you feel that you could actually become a professional baseball player?
Well, I always felt that way, because, like we have Don Sutton here, and you're watching TV, and you're looking at when he plays, and just imagine the time if you get the opportunity. And then my brother and the guys that come up with him, he was a great baseball player around here. And like I said, if you're a younger brother of older brothers, so what did you do? You played when he played, and you worked out when he wanted to work out. And, I had to love the game, because, it's baseball in those days, hey, everybody loved it. Even to watching Tony Kubek on Saturday. And you made it a point to get to the TV to see it.
Now, I know that growing up and coming out of this area, it's a big step to go into professional baseball, but you had a great mentor, because your first manager in the Minnesota Twins organization in Elizabethton was Fred Waters, who was a Pensacola product as well. What did Fred mean to you?
Oh, Fred was more than like a father to me, because he explained and taught you the game. And if you listen to Fred, he could tell you things to prepare for and work at it and work ethic. And, he was very soft-spoken, but, the point of him talking to you, you got across the, how you're supposed to do it. And I love Fred, and like I say, he helped me a lot, because we used to have to play against Fred and Kevin in high school. And that was some kind of opportunity we had against those players and the coach.
Breaking into the big leagues in the late 70s, playing for the Minnesota Twins, you're a left-handed hitter, and you're teammates with one Hall of Famer, Rod Carew, and your hitting coach is another Hall of Famer, Tony Oliva. What did those two guys help you accomplish in your career?
Oh, those guys, hey, it's just greatness looking at them and just seeing. And then talking with them, they could show you what they wanted you to do, even at their age. And, and just listening to them, Tony was more easygoing. Rob was straightforward, and he'll challenge you, and put forth and make you get an effort. And Tony, he could talk to you, and be just as nice. But both of them got a point of hitting the ball, And hey, I loved it, and they could do it great, and I tried to learn what I could learn from them.
Coming from the Florida Panhandle, I can't imagine you enjoyed Minnesota winters much in the time that you were up there, but Minnesota summers are pretty nice. How did you enjoy big league life living in Minneapolis?
I love the fishing. And in summertime is great, but Lord, the wintertime, hey, the most I could stand was 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and then they get one of those North Dakota's snowstorms would come through there, and that would help me come on home and go fishing.
What would you say is your favorite memory of playing in the big leagues?
Playing in the big leagues for me was to go and see New York and the fanability of New York and the love for baseball in New York. And Boston the same way, because you could come to town and nobody know who you were, but boy, they could give you trouble from the airport all the way to the hotel.
That hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed. And I can understand that, and that was different for me.
After your playing career, you went into scouting, and you've continued to help mentor the next generation of ball players. Why is that so important to you?
Well, the main thing is when I got out of baseball, I got into scout, and Fred Waters was the chief scout around here, and he took me on his wing, and he'd take me and show me the ways to go, and all I did was follow them even up to his last days of playing. And that was the best experience I could say, because he could talk to the kids, and then he could go in the house and talk to the parents. And that's another thing in scouting and coaching, is dealing with the parents. A lot of parents is a little different than all of them, but he showed me how to work with them, and then he showed me how to take notes. And, hey, it was great. I enjoyed those 6 years.
My final question for you, Hosken, is I know you've enjoyed retirement. Besides watching the Blue Wahoos and other major league games from home, how are you enjoying your free time here living in Pensacola?
I love Pensacola because, hey, like I said, no day is the same day, and all days are good days. But like I said, we get a storm here too, but hey, there's no place I'd rather live than Pensacola.
Amen to that. Hosken, thanks for coming out. We'll see you at the ballpark this summer.
Thank you.
Earlier this week, the Pensacola Blue Wahoos that they will once again be dressing up this summer as the Pensacola Seagulls, a Negro Leagues team that played here in Pensacola a few decades ago. And who better to talk about the Pensacola Seagulls than the author of Baseball in Pensacola, Scott Brown. Scott joins us today. Scott, thanks for taking the time to talk baseball, but I know that's something that you love to do. How are things in the off season?
Well, pitchers and catchers have reported, so we have baseball from now until the 1st of November. So it is a very good time of year.
Well, I'll start very broadly. I've had a chance to read your book and portions of it that pertain to the Pensacola Seagulls, but for the fans who might not know, who were the Pensacola Seagulls?
I think the only way to answer who were the Pensacola Seagulls are to go back a little farther in Pensacola's history. Most people may not be aware that Pensacola has a rich, rich history with African-American teams. In some cases, more dynamic and more rich than other southern cities. We actually started in Pensacola giving a place to the African-American community on the diamond in the late 1800s. It was around 1890, actually, that the first Negro League Park was built in Pensacola, right off of North Pace Boulevard, close to where the Pensacola Retirement Village has sat for years. And Coop Freeman's Park was an amazing, amazing facility. It was not only a baseball diamond that held over 500, but it was kind of a fairgrounds, which had a horse racing track and a boxing ring. And the baseball team itself, the Giants shared that facility with the Onwards, two wonderful teams, was all African-American run. Everything from the front office to concessions to team management to team structure. It was an entire Black community endeavor. And the draw of the fans during that time really set the mark for where baseball would go in Pensacola in later years, not only in the white community, but in the Black community as well. And Coop Freeman's Park was a destination spot for all of Pensacola.
Now, it was just kind of the wild, wild west in the latter half of the 19th century, the first half of the 20th century, in terms of the construction of leagues, both in white and black baseball. I know that in Birmingham, they have the Negro Southern League Museum. A couple hours down the road, the Biloxi team played in the Southern Negro League. So what leagues did the Pensacola Seagulls play in, and what would you compare that to in terms of quality of play?
Well, the Southern Negro League was what Pensacola was most closest attached to in not only exhibition play, where those teams would come in from the larger cities and utilize Pensacola as a training and proving ground, but Pensacola was highly scouted by the Southern Negro Leagues as well. And many of the gentlemen that either were from Pensacola or had ties to Pensacola and played on several of our early teams had links to the Southern Negro Leagues and would go on to play in major cities during their career. Pensacola became the place that scouts came to find the best of the best. Buck O'Neill attested to that years later when he was scouting for predominantly the Cubs, and he would come through this area of the South and always stop through Pensacola because there was premier talent on our fields, both white, but especially black.
You mentioned that there was community involvement in running the Pensacola Seagulls and the other Negro League teams of the era. Obviously, to survive as long as they did, they had to have a great deal of commercial viability. What kind of following did the team have in this general area?
Well, the Seagulls were one of several African-American teams that we had going from the 30s up through the 40s. And you would have teams like the Pensacola Stars, the Giants, the Onwards again. But the Seagulls became the standout. One of the reasons was that their home field was Maxent Park, later to become Legion Field. And that was the home grounds of the Pensacola Flyers, which was, the team that set the pace for where we are today in baseball in Pensacola. But the fact that both these teams shared this field not only as practice and playing field space, but it rallied the community. Now, we still, back during the late 30s, early 40s, had segregated seating at Legion Field. But the reality was that it was a draw. Everyone that I spoke to that still remembers those days in whatever community, whatever neighborhood you grew up in, remembers that Legion Field was the place where people came to intermingle with other Pensacolians. And you had a contingency of African-American fans that had certain players that they loved. What was called the black seating, which was along the third base and left field line. Their fan favorite was Neb Hack Wilson, who played left field for the Flyers. And whenever Neb came out to the field or got up to bat, you could hear the African-American section just explode with excitement. But the nice thing about that was the reverse was opposite. When when the Seagulls were playing at Legion Field, the white fans also had their fan favorites, and they created as much of a stir. We were still segregated, whites not playing with blacks. We were still segregated, whites not seated with blacks. But as far as the fans was concerned, we had already in our minds broken the color barrier.
Well, you mentioned breaking the color barrier. Jackie Robinson famously broke the Major League Baseball contemporary color barrier in 1947 when he debuted for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And that was a slow, gradual process throughout the major leagues. Segregation in minor league baseball remained, in fact, until the early 1960s. The current league that we're in, the Blue Wahoos, play in the Southern League. The predecessor to the current Southern League folded in the early 60s when they just refused to admit black players into their ranks. How did the end of segregation and the gradual change that occurred at other levels of the game impact the Negro League community in the South?
It's interesting. I think we have to take Pensacola out of that mix a little bit because we were and still are a very different city when it comes to our community. And I say that as a white male, and I don't have the complete insight as growing up as an African American. But during my research and speaking with the African American families who who were tied to our game in Pensacola, with players on various diamonds, players on various teams, both in Pensacola and abroad, all talked about that community relationship. There was still that barrier. But we had situations arise like one of our most illustrious player managers within the Pensacola baseball history, Wally Dashiell. We had a gentleman that played on the Pensacola Stars, and his name was Charles Mobley. He played shortstop, and he was an incredible, incredible individual. And because there was shared space at Legion Field, there was the idea presented by Dashiell that Mobley would become a infielder for the Flyers. And when wind of that came to the ears of the local police chief, he came to both men and said, "Look, this may bring about a disapproval, and it's nothing I can contain." So they didn't go ahead with it, but it was Charles Mobley and Wally Dashiell who eventually opened up desegregated seating at Legion Field just around the same time that Jackie Robinson signed his contract. We actually had inter-raced exhibition games going on at Legion Field prior to and just after the color barriers broke. But for our Pensacola Seagulls, that time element that changed the face of baseball for our nation had great effect and little effect on the fanship of the team. It had great effect because it opened up opportunity for the Seagulls to become desegregated as well. But it had little effect because they had such a wonderful following in all communities throughout Pensacola that continued to rise. The Pensacola Seagulls did not actually break up until the 80s. And at that time, there were both black and white players, including one young player by the name of Greg Litton, who would go on to play with the San Francisco Giants, the World Series against the A's, and is one of Pensacola's finest baseball sons. And he has great memories of playing alongside other men who had cut their teeth on some of the smaller diamonds around Pensacola.
One name that keeps coming up in your book, and it came up in my conversation with Hosken Powell the other day, Johnny Joe Louis. He was a major figure in the Pensacola Seagulls era of baseball here. Who was Johnny Joe Louis, and what did he mean to this community?
Johnny Joe Louis was a son of Pensacola. He grew up in the inner city neighborhoods, and talking to some of the people that knew him as he come up, said he was probably one of the finest ball players to ever be produced out of the Pensacola area. I can also attest to that, and so can the St. Louis Cardinals, who drafted him in the 60s. And one of the first games that he ever attended as a player for the St. Louis Cardinals was a World Series game in 1964. And while Johnny Joe did not play in that series because he was a young rookie just coming up, he was a part of that team. Johnny Joe went on to play for not only the St. Louis Cardinals, but the New York Mets. He was in player development. He was an incredible hitting coach for the Mets. He was later did some scouting. But Johnny Joe never forgot where his roots were. He always came back to Pensacola and gave back. I've talked to young men who have desired and have become major leaguers themselves, and say that, it was Johnny Joe who spent time with them, instructed them, gave back to the area where he came from. And Johnny Joe Louis was one of the finest gentlemen that you will ever come across. But major league players that are now retired, if they happen to have Johnny Joe Louis as their hitting instructor, will tell you that they became the success that they were and are because of Mr. Louis. At his passing, I had the distinction of and the honor of helping to deliver his eulogy. And I will tell you that the entire congregation was packed out with community members to celebrate the life of Johnny Joe Louis, who was not only a wonderful son of Pensacola, baseball player, but he gave to youth sports. Most succinctly, he was a youth golf instructor, really supported that. But Johnny loved Pensacola. Johnny loved baseball. He loved his family. And it was just at a conversation with him that you could tell he had equal passion for all.
It's clear in our conversation and in your book that the Pensacola Seagulls played a huge role in the development of baseball in all communities, the Black community, the white community, and helping bring Pensacola together in a very turbulent time. But what would you say is Pensacola's greatest claim to the larger narrative about baseball in this country? Where did the Seagulls really fit into the bigger picture in terms of what they contributed to the story of baseball?
I think we have to dig just a little bit deeper than the game itself when we talk about the Seagulls, because there was such fan collaboration, as I said, from all neighborhoods, from all communities that loved the Seagulls and the other teams that were involved in the Pensacola Negro League landscape created a sense of being. They created a place for the community to rally together. As I interviewed people that were in, the late stages of their life that went to games as young people, would talk about a specific player or coach or even an owner who spoke into their life, gave them instruction, and gave them the encouragement that they too could achieve the dreams that they have. It may not be on the base paths, it may be in the business offices, but because of the way the Seagulls players, management, ownership ran their team, it was a picture of the community, and it helped many people today that are successful as not only business people but civic leaders and moms and dads and grandparents now really owe the Pensacola Seagulls their success.
I appreciate you joining us today, Scott. And one more time, the book is Baseball in Pensacola, America's Pastime in the City of Five Flags. Scott, where can our listeners, our fans, our viewers learn more about your work if they want to dig into more of this?
Well, I will suggest, and not a humble plug, they need to read the book. They can pick that up at the Blue Wahoos fan shop there at the stadium. They can also pick it up online at their favorite bookseller. I would also encourage them to take a look at the documentary that was produced through PBS WSRE that goes right along with the book. We're able to cover some things in the documentary we weren't in the book, and vice versa, to create a whole picture of baseball in Pensacola from 1868 all the way to present. Please know your baseball history. It's a part of you.
Well, Scott, thanks again for joining us. Hope to see you around the ballpark here this summer.
The Pensacola Blue Wahoos announced their daily promotions starting on Tuesday with Doggone Tuesday. Bring your pups out to the park.
Every Tuesday home game, every seat in the ballpark is the same price, and it includes a hot dog, chips, and a drink. This year on Wednesdays, we celebrate the Blue Wahoos 2022 Southern League Championship with Winning Wednesdays. We've got some education days early in the year. We'll segue into postgame fireworks as we get into the summer, and on Wednesday home games, you'll have a chance in the stands to play some ballpark bingo and win prizes.
The Pensacola Mullets are back on every Thursday, and we have 2 new jerseys this season.
Yeah, a couple new jerseys, a couple new hats, and drink specials throughout the night, as you've grown accustomed to on those Mullet Thursdays. Every Friday is a giveaway Friday. Stay tuned. We're going to be announcing those giveaways here in the coming days. We've got some really good ones for you coming up.
And on Saturdays, come join us for the best show on the Bay with Fireworks Saturday.
We'll wrap things up on Sunday with Military Family Sunday. Our afternoon starts are going to be followed by a chance for kids to play catch on the field and run the bases. I don't know if I've got a favorite, but something for everyone, right?
Exactly. I'm excited.
And again, stay tuned. Just in a few days, we should have the daily promotions for the individual giveaways and theme nights in advance of single game tickets going on sale March 1st. Well, Jory, that's all we've got for this week's episode of Wahoo Weekly, but we've got our friend Watson down here, and Watson is certainly ready for baseball season. We want to give him a chance to catch this ball. All right, why don't you hold the microphone for me? We'll see you next week.